So I've been getting asked this question a lot, and I wanted just to address it real quick. Functions. So a function is never actually ran until you call the function itself. So for instance, let's say we define a function as dictionary, and we want to pass in, let's say, car. What we get back from the function will be the definition of a car because that's how dictionary is defined, or that's what it's supposed to do, right? So going back to just a basic example, we want to print out a message when the user types in a name or the user gives a name as a string. So what we're going to pass in as a parameter is a name. So now we just define the function. We're not really actually using it. There's no purpose for it as of this minute. But inside of the function, we can have a print statement, and that print statement can have a string that says greetings, and we're going to use name because that's what name is defined as here in the parameter. So now we're going to ask for the user input. And the user input, it's going to be a string because we want text to be displayed on the shell itself. So we want greetings and then whatever name you plug in. So let's type in enter a name. And enter in a name. So now what's going to pop up here on the shell is this user, this input right here, or this string. It's going to ask the user itself in the shell to enter in a name. So if I were to run this, I would enter in, let's say, my name. But notice here, I'm not actually using the function yet, so nothing's going to get printed. This should just exit. Yep, and we get returned to a new line. So now I want to actually be able to use that function. So I'm going to call the function itself. And since what the user has inputted in is based on this right here, and it's set equal to user input, we want to use this user input and pass user input into the name. So now, if I do this, now whatever the user types in into the shell gets saved to user input. Now print message is being called, the function it's being called. User input, it's now being passed to name. And now if I were to enter in my name, it would say greetings, comma, and then Kevin. Let's test it out. And that's just in a nutshell how functions work. It's not going to work until you call the function itself. Let's comment that out. And now that this is commented, the behavior that we should notice is that since the function, again, is not being called, nothing is going to happen. It should just return a new line like that. Yep. And so let's try a different example. Let's say we want to define a function that just adds a number plus 1. So I guess we can call it addition, you can call it whatever you want, and we want to pass in a number. Now this function is defined, but we're not actually returning anything. We're not returning a value until we define it inside of the function itself. So now we can do return number plus 1. So now the behavior of this is this, again, this is just defined, nothing's going to happen. And we can notice that in the shell itself. So now if we get the user input, and this again can be anything. It could be input, it can be user input like this. It's whatever you want it to be. This is just naming conventions. So what I like to do is just user input equals input, enter in a number. So now inside of the shell, it's going to display this string, which is just saying enter in a number. So if we do 6, nothing will happen, right? Because the function is not being called. So there is an issue with this, but I'll get to that later. If I call the function now and I pass in user input, the expected behavior is that it's going to pass in user input to the function itself. And so if I plug in 5, or if I input 5, 5 is now plugged into number, and now 5 plus 1 is returned, and that value is now 6. So if I were to run this and I enter 6, there is an issue. Why is that? Because I didn't parse, or I didn't type convert this to an integer itself. So Python doesn't know, or Python knows, it's just incorrect data types being added to each other. So this would be an integer, and previously when I didn't have this int here, it would be a string. So now if I were to run this, enter the number, I guess 6, we should get